with my personal reflection, is it God's mission or is it yours? For me, the question I'm always asking is, what has God called this organisation to? So I am not interested in any of my personal motivation or agenda, or a board chair's personal motivation or agenda, which you do see a lot. It's a very humbling process to be on your knees saying, God, what is the piece of the puzzle that you have given us? And it's going to be different from, what I do at Tax Trade is going to be very different from Maxim or the Parenting Place or Rocha or Salvation Army. But what is it that God's given me? Me as in the organisation. What has God given us, this organisation? What is our piece of the puzzle? And there would be a lot of, I'm sure, experience in this room about the discerning process around that. Like, how do you discern that corporately? How do you kind of test that out? So that would be my first answer to that question. It's always God's mission. It's always God's mission. Do you want to add anything to that?
Around the funding one, doing a business enterprise in order to fund, the real work in the background. There's different approaches, and there's been a number of different studies that have been done on this, and some really critique the mixed method approach, and they say, look, it's a distraction, you shouldn't be going there, and others are fairly in favour of it. I think really it comes back to the same emphasis. Where's your put your money where your mouth is. Are you actually focused on the mission? Are you pursuing that mission? Is that the reason that you're doing this stuff? And is it obscured by doing this, or does it encourage and enhance the mission? Keeping that mission central. If that's the thing that God's called you to do, then let's do that, whatever means it takes. The other challenge of that is, you talked about the institutionalisation of a ministry response. And I talked a little bit about the relationship between the church and the social service entity, and the Salvation Army is a really interesting case in point on that. I think that there's a risk, possibly you can draw a correlation to missions and the need for evangelism, right? And you have the May month of missions where we do a fundraising drive in the church and everyone puts their money in the hat, and it's faith offerings over and above your regular giving and all these kind of cliche things. And there's a risk that for the person sitting in the pew, they've done their evangelistic endeavour, they've fulfilled their mandate of the Great Commission by putting some dollars on a plate. The same thing I think can happen in a social service context, where you outsource the requirement to love your neighbour in a practical sense to meet the needs of the widows and the orphans from a faith perspective. You outsource that and you end up doing ministry by proxy. And I found evidence within the Salvation Army of guilt within the Salvationists, the soldiers, because people would come up to them, and when they found out they were from the Salvation Army, they go, "Oh man, I really love what you do. You guys are amazing. You do such incredible work." And they felt guilty because they didn't actually do any of that work.
I mean, I can speak to the business unit within a charity just from a bit of experience that we actually did. We tried this at the Parenting Place just recently because we're getting a lot of requests for our highly talented creative people to do commercial contracts. And what we originally said was we need to put a cap on this to see how it goes. So X amount of time will be spent on commercial endeavours and no more, and then we will review this in 3 months, 6 months, and a year. So we went down this track, and well motivated, right? Because it's harder and harder to find. Well, I don't know. You might know if this is true, but there's a sense that it's harder to access philanthropic funds. And so therefore, should we not take a bit of responsibility and create our own money? So, that was cool. It was also a sense that it would keep our employees really engaged and really motivated. So we set a limit and we set some reviews. Now, what we've decided 18 months in is that the opportunity costs and the distraction from mission is actually too high in that setting. And so we've basically shut that down. And I think the way you fund that is really important. If you're going to go down that track, the way that is funded is really important as well. So that's just a little experience. But I think, like Peter's saying, it's really about, there's no, I wouldn't want to say there's a rule on that. I would just want to say, I understand why we would be looking at making our own money. And if we're going to do that, let's be really thoughtful about why we're doing it, how we're going to track the impact, and what kind of ceiling you want to put on that. So does that help?
And still fitting legally within the definition of a charity.
Yeah. The law, come on. That's why I said it. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a problem with being too professional. But I mean, I don't know what we mean by professional. Like, Christ-centered professional business practice should be pretty life-giving. It should be pretty awesome stuff. So I think if you're going to talk about professionalism in a way that loses the Christ-centeredness, then no, I don't want to borrow that. But I don't want to borrow that in my business. Yeah, so I think practices that support human flourishing and are theologically inspired, I'm interested in how they can help a not-for-profit be better at achieving their mission. So, I mean, Peter's joking, but actually having someone who's prepared to take the time to understand the heartbeat of your organisation and sit with you and do a few interviews is actually super helpful. And people do that in business all the time. Like, we think we're doing well with our clients, but how are we actually doing? Why don't we get someone to go and ask those clients, right? So that's really good. I've got two other reflections on that. As when I was the chair of Maxim, obviously a lot of donors walked with us. The donors that I appreciated the most were the donors that really took the time to understand who we were as an organisation, and that meant showing up to our events. It meant reading our materials, which is sometimes a bit hard going. So that kind of thing. But what that then, and we had a posture with these donors of saying, speak into us, right? So there was a permission giving. But the only reason they could do that is because they'd taken the time and energy to really get to know us. So one of my best donor interactions was when a donor would call me and say, hey, I'm not sure about what you're doing here, and in no way was the funding tagged to it. It was actually an act of love and partnership that they would do that. So having donors like that are absolutely wonderful. And then I think the other question is, who have you said to, I give you permission to point out my blind spots as a leader, my dysfunctions? Like, who are we saying that to? Who do we say that to? And then do we really know what the tools are to receive feedback? Because there's an art not just to giving feedback, but there's a whole body of work there about how we receive feedback really well. And so that would be something I'd be interested in just as individuals, like as leaders of the organisation or as board members, have I given people permission, and am I going to be okay when they actually make good on that? But I think your gut is probably, depending on the size of your organisation, I think your gut response there, that it's easier to see from outside than inside, is probably true. So build those connections, build your mission drift community, build those people that you're going to give permission to speak into your life, your organisation's life. Is that all right? Yeah.
There was some research done in the microfinance sector that looked at basically systematising that kind of approach, and they looked at organisations that had metrics of success for their social service endeavours. So, like, how well are we doing in achieving our mission? And they found that for those organisations that asked that question but failed to engage with the stakeholders at the same time, so that's the donors and potentially the clients, they're measuring it themselves, but they're not asking the people who really care about whether they're successful or not, both from a donor perspective and a recipient perspective, that they weren't effective in keeping the mission true.
Yeah, and that picks up on a point that I think Greer makes either in a couple of his talks or in the book about measuring mission. And there are ways to do this. As a business, we don't just put our P&Ls up at our weekly thing. We are asking questions specifically about mission. So I'm asking who exercised generosity this week in their interactions with your clients. Tell me a story where you were able to get kind of honest feedback. And those are the things that we really kind of praise, not just how many client visits did you do and how much money did we make. And I think Peter would know this more than me, but there are ways and tools to actually measure mission. But having those voices speak into you is obviously awesome as well. Yeah, there's a real difference in being able to recruit your own team and inherit a team. And so because Tax Traders is a relatively new startup, we were able to recruit our own team. And so there's a real discernment, there's a real Holy Spirit-led discernment with every person that comes in to our team. And what I'm asking is not just can they do the job, I'm asking God, why have you brought this person to Tax Traders? What is the work that needs to happen in their life? So I hope that if I was recruiting someone and I felt, gosh, there's a real sense of fear here, then I would be able to be aware of that, I guess, to start with. Even if you inherit a team, there is a lot you can do, and again, it doesn't cost any money, but there's a lot you can do with your professional development time as a team to try and peel back some of those layers and try, I mean, we're not necessarily a counselling organisation, but try as much as we can to maybe get to the nub of some of that. Was it a terrible work experience that they had that they really need to kind of work out? Is there something actually deeper that probably maybe counselling does need to happen, or something like that? So we've done a bit of work on. We've used the Lencioni framework. I don't know if you know that. Yeah, super fun, right? So we've used that, and that starts with a layer of trust amongst your team. And there's some really great ways of building that, which are safe. Trust and vulnerability, and then so I'm hoping that you could create an environment of trust where they feel, loved and they feel safe and they feel they can speak. Where maybe, I mean, you sound like you're someone who is good at discerning these things, so maybe you could have the opportunity to speak into that. Even at Tax Traders, we had this real environment where, because we mostly have Christians, they found it so difficult to challenge us because we're the boss, and it's taken us probably 3 years for some people to say, oh, actually, I don't agree with you, boss person. And it's a long task, right? But I had a real vision for how I wanted that to be. I had a vision for a lack of hierarchy and for that kind of honest critique and feedback. And then I went about working out what are the tools out there and that we can use to build that environment. But I know Christians we really like this honour and authority, and then you're talking about a Muslim culture as well, which has got some very strong cultural understandings of providing or not providing feedback. Yeah.
The Open Home Foundation have some practices in place that help to address some of the fear things that you were talking about as well. So that because they deal in social work and foster care placement, so they have to do child removal sometimes. So turning up to somebody's house, hi, I'm here to take your child. Fear. Absolutely. How is that person going to respond? What's it going to look like? And so they have basically a supervisory relationship. So every social worker has someone else who they sit with. And often before they go into a particularly gnarly environment, they know it's going to be challenging, whether it's child removal or some other situation, they'll often just sit together and say, oh, hey, look, I'm really worried about this. And they'll pray together. And so it's part of the culture of the place. And dealing with stuff afterwards, how was that? How did you go? Do you need some support? What can we do about it? And so it's an ongoing relationship, and they talk about it. It's open, and God's in the conversation.
There's different aspects of that, right? Yeah, I think there are some amazing organisations out there giving Christians confidence in their faith. Like Venn Foundation would be one of those. Venn, V-E-N-N. In terms of saying, how does your Christianity translate to culture right now? And I think confidence is a good, and love is a great way to reduce fear. Yeah, if we can have confidence in our faith and how that's translating even into these amazing environments that you're working into, that's helpful. So that's one.
Probably throw in Thinking Matters.
Oh, Thinking Matters, amazing. Yeah, love it. Yeah. Yeah, love Thinking Matters. Yeah. Yeah. I was at a Thinking Matters forum recently with my 12-year-old son, and he walked out of that and he said, I've decided I want to get water baptised. Awesome. That was the effect that had on his confidence, right? And his faith, because he's a real little thinker. Thinking Matters does a super cool work, and they are not just old school apologetics, they're really relational in how they do this stuff. So that would be another, Rodney's the guy there, another cool organisation to link up with. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I think that Nicola's comment around the time for people on the board and the fact that it becomes a token appointment and something else that you can have on your list of boards that you're serving on is often is often a factor. In my experience, boards tend to be token, and the person who's really leading the thing is the CEO. And then it almost becomes the job of the CEO to lead the board, which is not their job. So the job of the board is to provide a framework in which that CEO is able to fulfil their mandate, but they provide the mandate. And obviously there's a partnership there, and that's really key. So I agree with you. And I was actually listening to a podcast on non-profits are messy. That's the name of the podcast on the way up today. And they were talking about donors and board members' involvement within the organisational, like the practices of the organisation. So not just coming in for a site visit, but coming and spending time, understanding the heartbeat of the organisation and what drives it. So they're not just providing this token oversight position. They have the heart, and they promote the heart, and they protect the heart. So I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right, and I think you're right in your observation about how it's undervalued and underplayed in our context.
So I am, when I was doing a couple of boards, Maxim and the Parenting Place, and a couple of little other ones, people would always ask me, would you kind of join my board? And putting aside the practical time, right, what I always would say is, I don't have any more capacity to hold the burden for this organisation. So when I was praying about should I take on the chair of the board at Maxim and I was running, and the sense I had was, can you hold it? Not do you have a law degree and are you female and do you have children and whatever, but can you hold, and like you're saying, in the guardian role, can you hold the organisation? And I am under no illusions that at the Parenting Place, that has been given to me to hold. It's not Greg's, the CEs. It's actually the boards. I mean, we are obviously doing that with God. It's God's organisation, but I've been given this little piece of the puzzle, which is to hold the heart of that organisation. And so when people say, oh, what do you look for in a board member? Yes, it's great to look for all those skills and all that diversity. It's super important. But ultimately what you're doing is you're looking for someone who will hold that organisation. And then you might say, well, where are all these people? Where are they all? And if they could also be female or Māori or Pacific or have a different kind of theological underpinning or anything, that would be super helpful. Where are all these people? Well, I think we've got to ask ourselves some questions about this, because it's not okay that the only people that can sit on not-for-profit boards are rich, white, middle-class men. That's not okay, because they can afford to do that, perhaps. They don't need to go and, earn money. So when I was the chair at Maxim, everybody will be horrified, and this will probably be the last thing I'll ever be able to say at Wilberforce. When I was at the chair of Maxim, I introduced a stipend for our board members, because I wanted to open up the pool of board members to people who actually needed to be paid for their time, and so it wasn't for everyone. But and as a result, I got a young mum who was on. I got, someone who was very elderly, which I love having that diversity. I actually paid them because I wanted to open the barriers to having great people on the board. Now, that's just one little example of that. But if we are worried about mission drift and we think the board has a role to play, then we've got to have some different kind of conversations about how we actually find these people. Maybe we've got too many charities in New Zealand.
Yeah, maybe.
What's that?
How did you retain your charitable status by paying a board member?
It was a stipend. So, there's no problem with that. Absolutely. It was an honorarium, yeah. And look, that might not be for everyone, right? I didn't want that. I didn't need that. But it was just one little thing. Also, the way we actually run our board meetings, which is very white, which is very structured, which suits a Pākehā lawyer really, really well. Right, I love the, Actually, that's not how everyone makes decisions in the world. There are different decision-making models out there, and it's all very well to have someone who comes from a different cultural background who's Māori and stick them in a Pākehā board and then expect them to flourish and expect to get what you want out of them, which is diversity and a different worldview. You're not going to get that if you try and slot them into an existing structure of a very ordered Pākehā board. So I think there's things we can do around this to actually make governance much more of an attractive, effective part of keeping our mission.
Ian Grant said to me, there's nothing worse than having a rich retired businessman on your board because he's got plenty of time up his sleeve and thinks his money still speaks.
And when you've got a strong board, you feel free to actually stretch your wings and push the boundaries because you know somebody's going to actually call you back and put you in your place and call you to task,
It takes someone to get to that place.
It does. And again, things like, vulnerability and trust. And I meet with Greg Fleming, who's the CE of the Parenting Place, every fortnight, but also I've known him for about 15 years. And so there's a level of brutal honesty that I can speak to him with. And it was the same with Alex at Maxim. If you have coffee with someone for a couple of hours every fortnight for 5 years, hopefully you're going to build up a level of trust where you can, speak really honestly to them. But what you've described, Ken, is exactly what we see in in basically every not-for-profit. It's the tail wagging the dog. Instead of having like a real team approach and being like, okay, we've got different roles, but we're on the same, we're on the same page here, and we're each going to work to see this organisation flourish.